I take the position that actually whatever subjective reality you're in is reality. It's just that some realities have consensus and others do not. The dream world is real for you. And as the dreamer, we respond to the dream world as we would our waking reality. A lot of what we do is based on fight or flight. Survive and reproduce. If life is about that, it's a smash and grab, basically. The other side of that is that actually that's only one part of the story. There's this other broader part of you that isn't as interested in that game. It can very much support it and is connected to absolutely everything.
We're very much trying to awaken ourselves in that other state of dream. Is there room to recognize waking life as a dream as well? And we're live. Hey friends, thank you so much for joining us once again. This is No More Strangers. I'm your host, JT Erickson. And before I introduce our guest today, I wanted to do a small disclosure. Today we're filming at the Monroe Institute, and I have an affiliation. This isn't anything nefarious. The show actually began in its true inception in a conversation walking up the hill to Roberts Mountain Retreat. And this place has the three things that I care about the most and three things that I emphasized in the show: love, curiosity, and exploration. It's truly embodied here. The disclosure is I am on the advisory council for the Monroe Institute. That does not mean that, there is any sort of nefarious anything. With that, I'd like to introduce today's guest. This is Luigi Sciambarella. He is, if you've been to Monroe, you know. If you've listened to Monroe tapes, you know. He is a certified practicing and supervisor within the hypno-psychotherapy space. He is a board member for the Monroe Institute, and he is a residential trainer who also produced the Lucid Dreaming Intensive. And he is now also leading the R&D process here at the Monroe Institute. So, Luigi, thank you so much for being here and agreeing to sit down. There's a lot more. Husband, father, and somehow he's doing this, and somehow you have time to sleep.
Well, sleeping is my superpower, really. I mean, if I didn't have that, I think I wouldn't be able to function. And I think that applies to most people as well. But
I think
I wear many hats, as you've reeled off.
And I think this is just a touch. We all have many hats in our lives.
Indeed.
So
yeah, great to be here.
Thank you. Yeah, and thanks for agreeing to meet me here at Monroe. And thanks to Alan for letting us use her office. This is really sweet. Wanted to start us off talking about lucid dreaming.
Okay. Yeah.
It's something for me that has been a fascination. I've been dreaming since I was a kid. We all have. And in early youth, dreams had significant power over my life. It is my imagination. You developed the Lucid Dreaming Intensive. How did you do that? And I'd like to understand more about what lucid dreaming actually is.
Okay. So lucid dreaming, for those of you that don't know, is a dream in which you know that you're dreaming while it's happening. So this isn't just a vivid dream. It's knowing that while you're in the dream, this is a dream, and you stay in the dream, right? So sometimes people have that kind of realization, but then they snap right out of it. So a lot of people have lucid dreams because of nightmares, actually.
Right.
It's one of the biggest prompts is this can't be happening. This can't be real. And therefore, I'm dreaming. Let me get out of this because it's uncomfortable. But a lot of people have them, and they have them especially early on in life. So between the ages of sort of like 6 to 8 years old, something like that, is when people recall their first lucid dream experience or even out-of-body experience.
This tracks.
Yeah. So, we're just teaching Gateway right now. And when I asked, it was that age range, the people who'd had these experiences. So, but then what happens is that people start to forget about their dreams. So then they forget their dreams, and then they think that there's just nothing to it. So they just go about their daily lives, and that's it. And so for whatever reason, some people can cultivate a very strong lucid dreaming practice where they are aware of being in a dream maybe a few times a week even, or at least on a monthly basis. About 25% has it on a monthly basis. But then others just treat the night as a blackout period between coffee breaks.
Yeah.
Which is...
I'm surprised to hear it's 25%.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's about the stats are something like it's about 55% of people will have a lucid dream at some point in their lives, and 25% on a monthly basis. But when I say a monthly basis, I mean that sounds really high, but it could be like seconds. So you realize you're dreaming. You go, oh, I'm dreaming, and then you'll either try to fly or you're too excited, and the day collapses within seconds. So it's that kind of thing. It's not a prolonged lucid dreaming experience.
Got it. And so how are you recommending, or how are you even training or teaching people to be able to access that state while they're asleep?
Yeah, it's a great question. First of all, it's important to increase your dream recall. A lot of people say that they don't remember. They don't even say, I don't remember my dreams. They say, I don't dream. That's not true. There was a study done by Ciclari and colleagues where they were waking people up like every 90 minutes. I mean, it was torture. And what they found was that people dream about 5 times a night.
Got it.
So it's a question of increasing recall rather than ability to dream. There are very few people who have a neurological condition that means that they can't generate REM effectively and therefore they don't dream. But then, I mean, they have all kinds of daytime problems and even nighttime problems. And daytime problems, like real neurological damage is required there. So that is not most of the population. So most of the people who say that they don't dream are just poor at recall. And so what needs to happen there then is a development of a better relationship with your nighttime.
Okay. And
I always, in the course, I developed it with another trainer called Thomas Hassenberg, who I'm actually doing the gateway with. And he and I, we come at it from exactly the same position, which is you're not just trying to train yourself to remember your dreams. You're trying to build a relationship with your dreaming mind.
Okay.
And therefore, there's a lot more goal-directedness into the nighttime, but it fits into a bigger practice, which essentially you come across in dream yoga, in the work of people like Tenzin Wangyal Rinpoche, the Tibetan Yogas of Dream and Sleep, phenomenal book. And when I came across that, I realized that lucid dreaming wasn't just, become conscious in your dreams and play around, although that is great, but it's more like become conscious in your dreams so that you can explore the deeper nature and the constructs of reality, essentially, how the building blocks of reality are actually formed. If you're doing that in the dream, you might be doing that in the waking state, in these in-between spaces, what they refer to as the bardos, these life between life type spaces. And we have several in our physical life as well as in our dreaming lives. Then the more conscious you become in that process, the more freedom actually you cultivate within your psyche and within your navigations within the greater reality. So there's a massive practice there, and that's what really we put into the lucid dreaming program.
That makes a ton of sense. And it seems, and maybe this is me speculating, it seems very important that you're doing this work while you are in your waking conscious state to help support that.
Very much
so. It feels
so.
like there's a coherence that may be necessary or
Yeah, very, very much so. One thing that we want to avoid is substituting one life for another, where it's the dreams are more interesting and there's more fantasy elements in it. You can do whatever you want and so on. And certainly you can do that in a lucid dream. There are no rules really. So you can do that and it's pure escapism and pure hedonism potentially. And that has its place.
It does.
Play and creativity and flow in that sense. I would strongly encourage it actually, just so you can go beyond your limits of what you think you should be able to do or allowed. And, so you're giving yourself permission to play. And sometimes what people end up doing is practicing so much for the nighttime that they actually abandon their daily lives in a way. It's like, oh, this is mundane to be here.
Right.
And therefore, the lessons of raising awareness don't translate from one reality to another. So the goal essentially is to raise awareness.
Yeah.
And so awareness practices in the daytime then carry over into the nighttime, which show you your habitual tendencies, your habits, because that's what the dream world reflects. They show you where your blind spots are, for instance, where maybe you're budgeting your time and your thoughts and emotions. Maybe relationships as represented by other dream characters playing the role of
Right.
your mom, your dad, your siblings, your colleagues at work, your boss, whatever. But it's not them, it's you. And it's showing you, your biases.
Yeah.
And then working on those, then you take the lessons from that, you bring them into the daytime. So the complementary practices is not just about targeting the night only.
That makes a ton of sense. And there's something, or at least to me it does, I hope it does to y'all. There's also something sort of interesting here, because what you're describing is we want to awaken our awareness within the dream state that it is not the physical space, it is not real. And in doing so, we also see people engaging in escapism in the real world. And there are people who have high stress moments where they begin to dissociate. And we start to look at that. And I'd actually really like your opinion here. We see people who begin to view waking life as a dream and less real. And we would tend to look at that as a dissociative psychosis. Meanwhile, we're very much trying to awaken ourselves in that other state of dream. And that's the goal there. Here, it seems to be the goal to be grounded in this life experience. There's a push and pull there that I find interesting. And it tends to, I can see where folks would become enamored of the dream space where they have what appears to be control and authority. Mm-hmm. And if they lack it in their waking world, I can see where that becomes more appealing. There's a question in there, I assure you. Is there room to recognize waking life as a dream as well? And is it simply, in your opinion, I don't think, maybe you can answer it as a certainty, but are there only the two spaces? Is there a third? Are there layers to this exploration and experience?
Yeah, your question is multifaceted, so let me unpack it a little bit.
Thank you.
So I take the position that actually whatever subjective reality you're in is reality. It's just that some realities have consensus and others do not. So the dream world is real for you and as the dreamer, and if it wasn't, well, we wouldn't have a problem because it wouldn't fool you every night as it does. We respond to the dream world as we would our waking reality, using our typical habits of exploring an environment. I am here as a subject observing a world of objects, and that duality is what I take into the dream world as a habit. The difference is in the dream world that it's not, we treat it as a subject object. I'm here and like as a dream character that I identify with as Luigi in the dream. However, that world of objects is also a part of me. So it's subjective versus subjective actually in that space. And that differentiates it from physical reality where, at some level we do all connect. So that is a realization. However, we don't connect at the level of the personality. In other words, as it's not Luigi is everything. It's everything is, and Luigi arises from that all that is, just as JT arises from all that is. In the dream, everything's Luigi.
Yeah.
So that's the, so we don't drop into solipsism.
And when we bring that sort of thinking into waking life, that is almost explicitly what we would define as psychosis, where if you believe that all of this is your consciousness and your experience and no one else has it.
Yes, well, then you've been fully into solipsism, and you're saying, okay, well, how do I know that everybody else isn't just a non-player character? We're walking around in a world of NPCs, and anything goes, and taken to an extreme, that can be very, very problematic because you can just treat people as objects, because it doesn't really matter. And some people end up going down that road, so it's not, and some people do that without even getting the diagnosis. So it's far more common than, unfortunately, than we think. So the training is raising your awareness to be present in whichever reality you find yourself. That is the goal of lucidity itself. So that's why mindfulness practices in the daytime carry over into mindfulness practices in the nighttime. So if you're mindful in the dream, you're lucid dreaming.
Yeah.
That's usually what we're missing. So it's that higher order consciousness, or the self-reflective awareness, that is offline when we're typically dreaming. When we drop into dreaming sleep, there's certain areas of the frontal lobe, prefrontal cortex in particular, right, dorsolateral, if you want to be a nerd like me. Let's do it. Right, that kind of goes offline, okay? And that bit, when it comes online, is very heavily associated with being aware of being aware.
Yes.
Right, so it's not just about being aware and exploring your environment. It's about being aware that you are exploring your environment in a particular way. So I'm aware that I'm talking to you right now. So that awareness on the talking as well is the metacognition that is lacking in dreaming.
Yeah.
So in dreams, we typically respond as we would in physical reality.
Yes.
So we don't, it's not like in the movies where it's like, ooh, it's all woo. That's not it at all. You do things appropriate to the context, but you don't question the context. That's the bit that's missing.
And that's sort of the baseline dream.
And that's the baseline dream. So if you then start to question the context, you're saying, well, hold on a minute, why am I here doing this paperwork in the office when I'm actually on holiday and I'm not, I'm not being paid for this, right? Then you can go, oh, okay, I'm dreaming. That's what it is. So that awareness on awareness is the bit that then kicks in the lucidity bit.
Yeah.
The more you do that in the daytime, then it carries over into the night. The more you do it in the dream world, it carries over into the daytime. So there's this virtuous cycling that can take place. And that's really one of the main goals of lucid dreaming practice. So it's not just about, playing around and getting creativity in the dream, although that is a great benefit, but it's about raising your awareness. So then the question is, if I've got habitual tendencies that I carry over into the dream,
right,
where are they carrying over from? The daytime. So do I need to operate on autopilot in the daytime? Because if you're sleepwalking through your day, you'll sleepwalk through the night.
Yep.
It's not that you just say, okay, well, I'm going to put all my effort to become conscious in the dream. Because if you do that, the chances are you will have lucid dreams, but they'll be incredibly short-lived. And the chances are you'll have lucidity. Oh, this is a dream. And then you immediately get sucked into the dream narrative and you lose lucidity. So it's not like an on-off switch. The practice of staying centered, of knowing that so the self-reflective capacity needs a regular check-in, maybe not constant, but a regular check-in to make sure that you're not just being sucked into any old dream narrative. And when that happens, then we enter a more co-creative space with the dream. So it's not about controlling the dream, although that's how sometimes it gets billed. It's about controlling your own awareness within the dream state. And therefore, you can choose from that position, do I change the scene? Do I explore something else in the dream? Or do I stay with the dream that's already being formed and inquire about it, build a relationship with it?
Yeah. And it's something, as you're describing this, maybe everybody else is as well. I'm thinking back through dreams where I've had variations on the theme toward lucidity.
Right.
And sometimes it is, hey, I always do this. Why is that my compulsion? And starting to change the way I respond and becoming that observer of self. And also the storylines that show up in dream are so much fun to play with.
Sure.
So much fun. And I can see, look, I watch myself fall back into it. And sometimes it's fun to just watch the narrative unfold.
Yeah, and even interact with it. And then,
yes.
So it's not just, sometimes, people have these dream plans, it's a dream incubation and totally cool to do that, but hold it lightly, because when you go into the dream and you're conscious of it, and my plan was to be on the beach, but I'm here and I'm talking to you and I'm thinking, well, what's this interview situation that's been created in this dream? Before I just trash that and go to my beach, I can ask my dream, well, you've created all of this. What does this represent? What do you want to tell me about myself within this? So you stay with whatever the dream's already created.
Yep.
Not assuming that the conscious mind is the only thing that is actually relevant. You see, so this is what I mean about building the relationship.
Yeah, and I know to move it beyond just that awareness, several people that I've spoken with, it's used here at Monroe. A lot of people use the lucid dream as a gateway to an out-of-body experience, a full-blown rollout, the vibrational states.
Yeah. And vice versa.
Really?
Yeah. So I mean, when I first started having very regular out-of-body experiences and lucid dreams, so I'd had an early experience when I was 7 years old. I saw my dead grandmother. That kind of made me think, hold on a minute. Something interesting goes on in these threshold liminal spaces.
There are so many trainers that I speak with here who have those shared death experiences.
Yeah.
If you haven't chatted with Paul Elder about some of the his,
He's got Paul's
wild
like
stories.
5 or something. It's ridiculous. But I mean, here is perfectly normal. When I had that experience, and I was talking with friends, and I even spoke with the priest. He was like, I mean, first of all, he said like, don't do that. So I was like, I don't know what
Fair
that
play.
was. But it was, there wasn't really much understanding around that, what to do with it and so on. So, but when I was at university, and I mean, I always had that experience in the back of my mind, and I studied psychology and I wanted to find out more about it. And, the state of the union was, well, everything is, consciousness is an epiphenomenon. It's a byproduct of brain functioning. Massively influenced by ideas of Daniel Dennett and Consciousness Explained or Consciousness Explained Away. And there's great merit in that book, actually.
Totally.
But it was very much a reductionist kind of materialist paradigm. And so I didn't really accept that. I thought, no, I've had other interesting experiences that don't neatly fit into that. So I started to look around, and hypnosis came on my radar. I was... there was a friend of mine who was a hypnotherapist, and we weren't doing it like I do it with my therapy clients, somebody coming in with a presenting problem and we work through it. It was purely how low can you go and just messing around in a lab.
Sure.
We'd do that for hours at a time. And so I was the guinea pig and lowering myself into these very, very deep trance states. And from that, I started to have spontaneous out-of-body experiences. Very classic ones, literally peeling out of the body, floating, standing position, seeing my body in the bed. But all of this was going on at 3 a.m, right? At 3, 4 a.m. My student halls of residence, even students were asleep at that time, surprisingly enough, or passed out. One or the other.
Pick one.
That's right. And I was a good boy. I didn't do any drugs and alcohol and all that kind of stuff. I was there to study. But this was the way that I was exploring reality. And I would come out of my room and, maybe go through the wall or whatever and try to verify stuff.
Absolutely.
And, what can you verify at that time? The cars parked outside in the lot and pizza boxes and empty bottles of Jack. I mean, okay.
Of course that's what appeared.
Well, yeah, exactly. So to me, that didn't really cut it for me. It was an interesting state, but I didn't know what to do with it. And I came across the work of Bob Monroe at the time, and I read Journeys Out of the Body, and I thought, oh, wow, this is amazing, But I was having the vibrational state that he talked about, it felt like the locomotive train was going through me. And then that would lead to the out-of-body, because it would lead to a sleep paralysis, and then I would roll out of my body or float out of my body, typically roll out, because floating can sometimes mean that a limb stuck to the bed, and my head would be stuck, my limbs would be floating up, that kind of thing. So I'd either sink or roll.
Or get the fall backwards.
Yeah.
Catch myself and wake up. It's a bummer.
Yeah, well, I mean, if you follow that sense of gravity down and you just keep moving with that, actually it's easier to drop out of body than it is to float upwards.
Yep.
So I was doing that. So exit techniques and so on working beautifully, but then not much else going on in that state. And I remember being kind of bored of it at some point. I know that sounds really weird, but I was bored of it. And I thought, well, what do you do with this? And I was calling for guides, no response, nothing happening. And I thought, okay, well, it's interesting. And yeah, I can observe and continue to explore reality from this different perspective without my physical body. But what do you do with this? So I remember asking one day, I just called out to the state and I said, something along the lines of, take me to a place to show me something that will help me to learn more about myself.
Cool.
And I can't remember the exact wording, but it was something about, learning more about myself. And I then went through the wall, and instead of being in the hallway, I was in a dream. so consciously in a dream. And that was really like my first, like, self-initiated, fully formed lucid dream.
Okay.
And what I found was that that environment was teeming with life.
Yeah.
You know, it was daytime straight away. First of all, that was already like, oh, great. And then there were characters and, you know, some people in my life, or the ones that were just completely made up, environments and so on, that were all active. And I thought, okay, this is really interesting. So I started speaking with dream characters, and, you know, I mean, I was playing around, flying and, you know, doing all the stuff, goofing off that you typically do with lucid dreams. And then I realized that, and this kind of happened accidentally. There was a situation that was going on where there was a particular conflict with the person that I knew, and I just couldn't really get my head around what was happening. And I met this person. I didn't intend to. I met this person as a dream character, and we're having a conversation, and I just thought, yeah, it's exactly the same as it is in the waking world.
Yeah.
But then I found myself actually becoming that other person in the
I was
dream.
about to ask, because there's something really interesting here.
Yeah.
If the prior supposition that all of the dream characters are facets of yourself engaging, that gives you this incredible opportunity for a form of empathy that might be deeper.
Yeah, very much so. I mean, empathy always has an as-if quality to it, right?
Yes.
So you get as close as possible. In the dream, you merge with that person. So it's not even an as-if. I mean,
it's
you're
an
literally
embodiment.
embodied. And there's two ways that you can do that. You can do it as me putting on the outfit of you, right? So it's still me, my own thoughts, but I've got, you know, JT clothing on, right? I've got your skin suit, yeah, right? And then the other thing is that I can leave my identity, my personality behind, and fully embody the other. Now, that might not be you in the waking state, but it's as my greater consciousness system creates you, right? You know, to borrow a term from Tom Campbell,
yep.
right? Which is a great term. So, you know, you can literally become the other person. As your dream reality creates that other person. So you're thinking differently, you're feeling differently. It's not just about, you know, you putting on an outfit. And when I did that, and I was listening to how Luigi was talking to me, then I had a different response that when I went back to being Luigi, I'm like, so that's how this person is receiving what I'm saying, or at least that's what my unconscious thinks, that that's how that person's receiving what I'm saying. So maybe I need to change the message in some way. And when I did that in the waking state, it was exactly the same as it was in the dream. So I don't know whether the dream was precognitive. It could have had an element of that. But also, you know, unconsciously, we're processing so much data that the conscious mind really isn't grasping at all, that it can build a superb picture of somebody else in a way that seems almost magical, you know? Yeah. So in the dream, it really was like talking to that other person and embodying that other person. So roll forward. I mean, you know, when I first started as a hypno-psychotherapist, I'd have some client sessions that I found quite tricky. Can't quite grasp what it is that my client is experiencing, and, you know, what their worldview is and so on. And so I would find myself in the dream doing exactly the same thing. So I was actually using it in a way to really connect with my client. And then in the next session, I would try out some of those ideas, and most often than not, they really stuck.
I was really thinking about what a powerful tool this is and how one could apply it. And wow, it might be one of the best tools for a psychotherapist in any case. I was thinking
definitely
political leaders, just people in a
Imagine
workplace.
Political leaders with empathy. What a world we'd have.
You know, let's dare to dream, Luigi.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But I mean, it is. So for me, it's a you know, lucid dreaming becomes a kind of, it's not just a playground, but it's a playground where I can really get to know myself, all of my blind spots and so on. So there's a part of my psyche that really knows where my biases are, what my limitations are, where I budget my energy, where my preferences are as well. It's not all negative stuff. It's just all about raising awareness.
Yep.
So where am I unaware in my daily life in some way? And that's what I explore when I go into the dream world. Likewise, though, then you can take that attitude back into waking reality. So obviously that has a great link there. Most people who have fun in lucid dreams carry that sense of energy with them into the daytime. So there's this benefit that is also physiological.
Oh, you're sort of spiraling up instead of down.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
So it's reinforcing growth.
Think about what happens with people with nightmares. That definitely impacts them in the daytime in a negative way. And they're fearful, they're more anxious, they've got tension in the body, they probably slept poorly, so that has a cognitive effect as well as various physiological effects. So think about the complete opposite of that is what you can cultivate in your dream practice.
Exactly. There was a framework within the Tibetan dream yoga writings where they were describing clear dreams. And a lot of it sounds very similar to some of the things that people experience here in Monroe.
Yes.
Where they're having these conversations with, we could call them guardians. I think that's what he referred to as, could be guides, could be anything.
Yeah.
And it's so, quick plug, it seems like the kind of thing where the Monroe sound science and the signals allow people to get to that space more easily. But historically, this is a space that people have achieved through meditation or other awareness practices.
Yeah, and those are still very valid, actually. Using the technology, it bolsters those practices and vice versa. Yeah. So, any sort of mindfulness practice is going to help. If you're in the daytime, really checking in and not being sucked into all of your thoughts, observation without preference or judgment, that's the root of mindfulness. And then you make choices from that.
Yeah.
Okay. So it's not, I'm the thinker of my thoughts. I'm not my thoughts. I'm the experiencer of my emotions. I'm not the emotions, and so on. So this is the attitude that you can take into, obviously, your daily life through mindfulness practice, but you also then carry that over into the nighttime so you don't get sucked into all the dream narratives. And, you can still be sucked in, but not overly identifying as a character in that.
Sort of a very present observation.
Yeah, present observation, absolutely. So that is one thing, but the technology slows down the entry into the dream state. So you can really start to pay attention to the layers as you approach dreaming. And obviously that's a practice, but this comes into the two camps of lucid dreaming that if you look at all the techniques, I mean, some of them are kind of somewhere in between, but essentially the two broad camps. You've got the wake-initiated methods and the dream-initiated methods. So typically when people have lucid dreams, they're surprised by some content in the dream that's already fully formed around them, and then they go, oh, I'm dreaming. That would be a dream-initiated lucid dream. And then there's the wake-initiated lucid dreams, which is what you'll come across in the dream yoga traditions, where you lower yourself into the dream without losing awareness. And because you're lowering yourself in, then sometimes the dream is a lot fainter, a lot subtler. Yeah. And so you start to notice things like the hypnagogic state, which is this kind of in-between space, a lot of perceptions of, colors and faces and just fleeting images. They tend to be quite sporadic and chaotic, but it can also be sounds, crashing sounds, doors slamming, somebody calling your name, buzzing sensations, all of that kind of stuff. Also physiological things like pulsing and like the vibrational state would happen more in the hypnagogic and so on. On their own, they don't really mean much. It's not that you actually have to do anything with the hypnagogic. You can treat it like an object of meditation, like you would any sort of mindfulness of the breath, of an object, of a deity, so you can do that. But then if you seed the hypnagogic, then it can start to form into a full dream, and then you're in it, and you haven't lost any of the awareness. So this is, something that the technology can help to slow down your brain waves, but keep certain ones a little bit more active so that dorsolateral prefrontal cortex doesn't go offline as readily.
Right.
So you just keep that thread of awareness going.
That makes so much sense. I'd like to move us out a little bit of a pivot.
Sure. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, because I think some of what you touched on is the natural flow here. One of the newer elements around the Monroe Institute is almost touching back on some of the original elements around research and turning back up that let's understand how this is working. Let's see how the brain is working with the mind, and I'm going to treat the two as separate in this case. You recently were part of the announcement of MIDAS. I always get this wrong. The Monroe Institute Department of
Applied Sciences.
Applied Sciences, thank you. Monroe Institute Department of Applied Sciences. Anyway, how did it get back to the place? What was the impetus for Monroe moving back into that state? Because we had a fairly prolonged, protracted period where it felt like we were just, I say we, I shouldn't, where Monroe was just having the residential programs and everything was still almost all based on Bob and his old team's work. And things have started really, I think, progressing, and it's very obvious when you come here.
Yeah, well, I mean, and thank you. I mean, it's obvious that neuroscience has advanced a lot in 50 years. I mean, Bob Monroe died in 95.
Wild.
So since 95, there have been tremendous advances and understandings of neuroscience that, we just hadn't been researching. So one of the things that, Bob and his team, his original Explorer team, which included Tom Campbell, they were very much about the experience. What is this state? Bob Monroe was a businessman. He worked in radio. He was having spontaneous out-of-bodies. And then when he realized that it wasn't going to kill him, he became curious and started to explore that state. And then he wants to know, am I a freak, or are there other people who also are freaks? No, other people who are also having experiences. And what does it mean if you have that, and can you cultivate it? So that's what they were really exploring in those early days.
And you mentioned, and you used the words, am I a freak? Are there other freaks? And to be very clear, like during the era when he was experiencing this, there was also a heightened awareness of some of the New Age movements. And, a lot of what he was doing was very, very intentionally managing the language that he chose to use.
Yes.
And I see that everywhere right now, because we, as people, want to be taken seriously.
Yeah.
And if you're using frameworks or terminology that instantly other you to everyone else, you're not going to be paid attention to. You're going to be written off. And these subjective experiences are, as you said at the very onset, very real to each of us.
Yes, and there's also two camps of research here as well, which is to do with the personal subjective experience. So that would come under more of like the transpersonal elements.
Sure.
How does this apply to you understanding the broader reality for yourself, the broader context, and what's your subjective experience? How does this help you in some way? So. Okay, yeah, you can go off and fly around the universe, but what does that do to your daily life? And one of the first things that Bob discovered was that when people have out-of-body experiences, they usually have a significantly reduced fear of death.
Right. Which is a huge deal.
Which is huge. I mean, a lot of what we do is based on fight or flight, and reproduce, right? Survive and reproduce. That's the basics of Darwinian evolution. If you're not doing those two things, then you failed as an element of the species.
Right.
So this, if life is about that, then, and you've lost the connection to any sort of spirituality, and I'll come to that in a moment, then life can very quickly turn into, well, what the point of all of this? The point is acquire whatever you can before you die. Make sure that you can provide for the others who follow you, so your offspring. But it's a smash and grab, basically, and you're what Paul Gilbert refers to as the control and hold system.
Yeah.
Right. So it's just grab it all, and you see what that's done to society. I mean, you can understand where it comes from, and it's entirely justifiable from one part of your head.
Absolutely, it's almost a very short-term productive nihilism.
Yes, very much so. The other side of that is that actually that's only one part of the story. You're in a perishable body, so of course you're going to have to look after it and, do the whole survival and reproduction thing if you want to. And there's this other broader part of you that isn't as interested in that game. It can very much support it and is connected to absolutely everything. And you see this very clearly in, you just look at the TED Talk of Jill Bolte Taylor, My Stroke of Insight, phenomenal book. Her second book, actually, Whole Brain Living, is really, really well worth a read. So I'll give a plug to that. What you see.
I want to double down on that plug. Go watch the TED Talk, if nothing else.
Yeah. If you haven't watched the TED Talk, really, it's spectacular, because she shows because she had a stroke and that kind of took out her left brain worldview. Then there's this interconnectedness of the right hemisphere which is all about the here and now. It's the parallel processor, and it's a lot more interconnected. And that is a system that we don't lean into as much. But it is really interesting because there's different theories on like evolutionary psychology. So I'll come back to the research question,
Sure.
and this is what's leading some of the things that I'm getting the research team on, right? So there's this idea that the old brain is only about fight or flight and survival. That's the brainstem. That's the reptilian brain. And then there's the mammalian. Then there's more like the human brain, right? So it's inside out, So your basic survival drives are all in the brainstem, and they're all about fight or flight.
Right.
And so when we start thinking about social structures and cohesion and connection and all those things like love and empathy, compassion, we tend to think that that's all later in the game.
Right.
Not true at all.
Really?
If you look at, there's pretty substantial evidence that humans were nearly wiped out several times, but
We have at least some evidence from DNA analysis that we're down to like 30 mating pairs or something.
Yeah, it was ridiculously low. So it depends on the analysis, but there's kind of an idea that maybe we were like down to a tribe of a really, really small tribe, like 100 people, if that, 100 to 200, which is incredibly tiny. Fight or flight does not work in that environment. If you only stay with fight or flight, it doesn't work because it's just too small to sustain itself. You need the ones who are going to go and hunt gather and explore things, but you also then need those that are going to look after a homestead and work on social cohesion and stay close as a unit to protect. So actually the social brain evolved at that time very rapidly, almost in parallel with the fight or flight system. So fight or flight comes much earlier, because you see it in older mammals and primates and all that kind of stuff that we came from. But the social system is at least a couple of million years old. I mean, we're not talking about something that only came around the corner, right? So obviously in evolutionary history, that's a blink of an eye, but so are we, right? So if you've got a system that says you've got a social element which is all about connecting with others and not only like cohesion for the sake of it. I mean, there's boundaried cohesion as well. There's mutual respect and so on, but it isn't a smash or grab.
Right.
And that is the point, So empathy is actually something that you can see in the old brain because you immediately can read whether somebody who's coming into the cave, for instance, is friend or foe. You need to be able to read their emotions almost instantly. So this is an old system. It's not frontal lobe only. It's insular. I mean, we're talking brainstem stuff going on there. So this, even from a neuroanatomical perspective, there are things there that we've kind of taken as read that are just not so. So this isn't just Bob Monroe's, angle of research and whatever. And, how do we connect more as a species and advance the species in some way, which is obviously what they were doing in that research 50 years ago plus. But it's also something that's very relevant to what's going on in the here and now, because you do hear messages like, well, it's all fine doing all this lovey-dovey stuff, but, the real world is dog eat dog. Dogs don't eat dogs, They sniff each other's butts at most. So that's what we could say. But, so we probably shouldn't use that as a good as an analogy anyway.
There's got to be a better analogy.
There's got to be a better analogy than dogs. But, I mean, if you look at dogs, they're actually really friendly with each other for the most part. But then they also have their boundaries. That's perfectly fine. We're not as aggressive as we think we are. That is a way of being that's been cultivated over time. Doesn't need to be like that at all.
Right.
There are centers in your brain that will fire up as if you're getting physical pain when you're socially isolated. That's there for a reason.
Yeah.
It's because we are relational beings.
And our survival was largely predicated on that society.
Exactly.
Exile used to mean death.
Yes, exactly. Exactly that. So, so taking that idea as well, we've got the transpersonal elements in the research. You're doing this for yourself. You're trying to find out, who am I? Where did I come from? Where am I going? All the big sort of questions individually, but also then we can start to see it as a collective. And I think that that's one of the real big gains of actually coming to a program at Monroe, because people come for themselves and then they realize I'm in this field, the shared field with other group members, and there's actually a lot of stuff that goes on that is way beyond what goes on with the headphones on, right?
Yes.
So one of the things that I'm really interested in, and obviously this is one of the things that the research team is looking at, is how can we take that idea that Bob Monroe had, where it needs to provide something of value both to the individual and to society. How can we take what we've learned in expanded states of consciousness into the wider world so that people connect more? So it can actually be, that's what the applied science comes in. So it's not just research for the sake of research. I'm totally cool with that, and it's perfectly fine for people to be researching stuff. That's one of the wonderful things about our species. We're just curious.
And we can have people that do that.
Yes.
Like, we can, and it's great for us.
Yes, yeah. And keep doing it. If you're one of those, perfectly fine. You're advancing the species, good for you. And we also need something that says, how do we take these academic-like findings or academic findings, even if they're not peer-reviewed, but they've been done in a systematic way, that's a curiosity. How do we take that and convert it into something that's actually meaningful for the majority of the population?
Exactly.
So this is where the research angle has shifted. Because, we were doing a lot of in-house research, and it wasn't designed to be published necessarily. We'd have it in our archives and so on. There's plenty of publications in there, but it's mostly to do with how can we, develop our technology? How can we develop our applications, which then inform our programs, inform the exercises that we make available on CDs, on downloads, and whatever else. So it's all kind of kept in-house.
Yeah.
The leaning is more on now to move it from that is relevant. So that's one facet of Midas, the in-house research and perfecting the product, so to speak. The rest of it is how can we partner up and collaborate and get things out there in a way that is meaningful for the majority of the population, to sort of tell them you've been sold this really interesting story, but a very limiting story and limited story about survival, and it's only part of the picture. And here's a lot of evidence, as evidenced by a lot of academic institutions, but maybe their findings are hidden behind paywalls and academic language. So not everybody reads academic journals, and even if they did, how do you translate that into something that says, and because we know this in lab type settings, naturalistic settings, but studied in very, quantitative and qualitative research ways, this is what you can do about it. This is how it has a direct effect on your daily life. So that's the next bit, that maybe we haven't touched on as much as an institute when it came to research.
And there are two things here that I'm really thinking about. And I've heard people come out of this saying, okay, I had an out-of-body experience. I'm good. I don't know what this does for my daily life. And it sounds like that's something that's sort of being explored and more communicated around, which I'm really happy about that. Whenever somebody can have an out-of-body experience and then say, oh, it didn't do anything for me, blows my mind. Blows my mind. The other side of this that I'm thinking about as you're saying this, it helps to frame up the importance of that internal only, non-navel gazing data collection that's been going on here for years, because it's advanced things here at Monroe far enough that now we're able to have those discussions about how do we start to actually impact the world outside of this without the work like Judith Pennington's work with Discover.
Yeah.
Without that, could things have moved the way they are now? And I don't think so. Like, I think there's a lot of, I very much honor the tradition and the history of what's been happening here at Monroe, and using that as a baseline, like a jumping off point, seems, I want to say, important and brilliant, but that's probably putting it a little strongly.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it is. I mean, and there's relevance for all of the type of research that we're engaged with. So the department is kind of, one of the things that when I looked at it, I thought the department's way too small to be able to cause enough of a ripple. We're in the age of connection, of collaboration. Let's really lean on some of the relationships that we have so that we can support them. They can support us in the best way possible. Because, in the past, and I mean, it's still very relevant now, depending on the academic institution, but it's like, well, I found something and they protect it and stifle it. And, there's this idea, and this leads on to what we've set up in England as well, which is the idea of a collaborative shared space where academics can all plug into it maybe exploring slightly different things, but we build a bigger picture view than just one institute or academic space would be able to do on their own. And then also those two areas of research, I didn't say what the second one was.
Yeah.
There's the transpersonal. So like, how does this impact me? What's the point kind of stuff? And then there's more of like the parapsychological, where actually the science to be able to study things that have normally be considered part of the realm of parapsychology, and you're really dismissed because of weak effects and so on. The science has really caught up, so that it is possible to evidence things that show non-local consciousness effects, for instance, and so we're interested in exploring all of that.
Yeah,
Some of it is more academic. We're just curious and we just don't know.
Yeah,
where it's going to go, and the rest of it is more like, okay, well, how does this apply to you, and how can you get more joy and meaning and purpose out of your physical life, as well as in these altered states of consciousness.
That makes a ton of sense. And I know that Monroe has been working historically with UVA's DOPS program. You mentioned working with folks in the UK. Is that in Leeds? Is that?
No, so what it is, like for instance, now we're just about to start a project with Yale. I mean yeah. So no, but I mean we've got DOPS as well. So that is essentially an MRI study, so magnetic resonance imaging, before and after taking part of the Gateway program. So what we're trying to look at there, I mean, that's why it's about collaboration. Yeah, because I mean, Monroe, we're a non-profit. We rely on donations. Our funding mainly comes from people coming and taking part in programs. That keeps this place alive.
Yeah.
Nobody's getting rich off this. And so to buy an MRI scan,
a little out of the budget, maybe.
Yeah, well, I can try it. I could try it. But it's a little bit out of the budget, and you need a particular skill set to be able to analyze that data.
Absolutely.
So we're very, very grateful that Yale's going to do that, right? So we provide the expertise in terms of, knowing about the Gateway program and how to put it on and so on, support the participants and so on. But they're doing the recruitment. So they're going to be looking at, are there physiological or neuroanatomical changes that take place when people do the Gateway program, start and end. And that then goes hand in hand with maybe some of the more subjective elements, so attitude change, beliefs, whether they're limiting or not, how those shift throughout the program. So there's a subjective, a qualitative, and a quantitative measurement there. So this goes beyond what we've been able to do with EEGs.
Yeah.
Because and we've got loads of EEG studies in the pipeline, but what is the effect of certain types of frequencies on the brain when you're measuring it with an EEG, multi-channel versus simple bands and all this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
That will always have a place. And we also want to know, well, is this really changing your brain?
Yeah.
So this is where in the discovery program, we look at what the EEG signature is. Can you consistently get into it? And we can infer that there's brain changes.
Right.
But unless you do the MRI study, you don't know.
The before, after, and then large enough groups.
Yes,
yeah.
Exactly.
The EEG studies here with Discover, my friend Dr. Tarrant over at the Neuromeditation Institute out in Salem is doing some very cool stuff as well. And again, none of it gets to actually the point of, are there physiological changes?
Yes.
Is there a cause and effect? You can observe very different patterns of things during different states, measuring it during focus 10, focus 12, measuring it when you're doing, say, like psychic activity like channeling, watching
or remote
areas
viewing and that kind of thing.
Yes, and watching various elements, the right parietal lobe activity dropping out as you start to reduce your sense of self and the filters come down.
Yes.
Sorry. I get nerdy about the EEG studies.
So do I.
It's so cool. It's so cool. And so much cooler to be able to look at MRI data.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it goes hand in hand. You're building up a picture, and then you've also got to then have a look at what people's subjective experiences are relative to that. Because, one of the things that we can show, for instance, is that, I mean, we see this in Discovery. We saw it in the Euphoria study as well. People can say that they clicked out. I was not present, not much going on, and yet it shows a beautiful pattern for the awakened mind, or that you were 65% in the target zone on whatever. And you go, well, I fell asleep.
Your gamma was through the roof. You're approaching something else.
Yeah. And then the opposite can happen where you get a low score.
Yeah.
And, like I remember like in the Euphoria study, I was in a free flow Focus 21. So this is the bridge between physical and physical realities. And, partway through, I met my dead friend, right?
Like you do.
And, I'm having this conversation with him. My score came back abysmal,
Yeah.
So once you've clicked into these states and then something else happens, then, maybe your brain looks a bit more chaotic because I'm having
and maybe
an
it's less
encounter
about
with
the brain.
Less about the brain at that point. It's more like...
And that's where we run into the limitations of data collection, which have historically prevented a lot of these studies from occurring.
And also that they've not really combined things. So you want to do, like, for instance, we're doing EEG study, combining that with heart math.
Yeah.
Yeah, because then you can see, well, how does the brainwave entrainment and effects relate to heart rate variability and things that are going on in your heart? And so this is just one of the ways that we can start to map things, you see.
Yeah.
So there's several things that we can be combining all at once. And the technology is only just about available now, a lot of it is actually going through teething problems, and so this is, is going to go through several iterations until we get something that is widely accessible. And then the other element is to really be able to tap into citizen science, so that we can get people from wherever you are in the world plugged into a system that then allows you to provide data, but also get something useful out of it wherever you are in the world.
There's it's something I keep thinking about, because when you're in these experiences, doing gateway, doing meditation, it's all very subjective. And if you hear the stories, in the debriefings after a meditation, you hear some wild things, but over time, I'm sure you've noticed versions of this, you start to hear sort of rhyme schemes appearing, very similar archetypes of the experience.
Yes.
And they all seem to be very well catered to the subjective experience of the person. And moving out towards that citizen data collection, you start to potentially begin to develop cohorts. It starts to look a lot like what we saw with the rise of the internet, where that one guy in town does this, no one's ever heard of it. Well, it turns out that scales over a large enough population. And I think the data collection aspect here gets very exciting when we start to be able to say, okay, there are more hyper-specific cohorts with different responses to a Focus 10 experience, or a transcendental meditation experience, or whatever your modality of choice happens to be. And that allows us to start really saying, maybe I'm going bit too far, but you can start to have some prescriptive engagement with, if this fits your personality archetype or your experiential archetype, here are things we can do to help you live a better life, which is one of the goals. I mean, Monroe has it's the 2036 goal of 1% of the population having had an experience. And that sounds broad and it doesn't sound aggressive, but that's a significant number of people.
Yeah, it very much is. I mean, right now it's 80 million.
2032, I'm sorry.
2032, yeah. I didn't say anything because we could do with the extra 4 years. But
sorry about that.
But I mean, it's still a very ambitious goal, and it's about getting a critical mass of people that understand our interconnected nature and they're seeing reality in a slightly different way, but a dramatically different way as well, and then it's not just about trying to get 1% of the population being X-Men, right? That isn't the goal, because otherwise then what we end up with is othering people.
Absolutely.
And this is often the thing about some of the parapsychological effects and so on. There are some people that can do things that are seen as like, wow, that's amazing. That person's a freak, and it's not that. It's to show that actually we are all connected to this. We're all capable of doing some very interesting things with our consciousness and how we relate to ourselves and others. And this is why we do programs like spoon bending. It isn't about bending a spoon. It's about, if you think that something is totally solid and yet you're still able to manipulate it in such a way that it does all kinds of bends and twists and whatever else. But it's about, well, what beliefs do you hold that are solid? that are actually not so,
Yes.
And so one of the things also with the citizen science and having participants from all over the world being able to plug in, first of all, that wasn't possible before, because the way that things work with devices and the internet now, it means that we can actually see what somebody is doing, what their EEG is doing, half a world away, and in real time. So that is something that doesn't require bringing everybody into the lab and so on. So we'll certainly have lab studies, but we can do things at a distance. But what it also means is that there's something that is actually usable in the person's home environment, which is one major thing. And we can also then start to see if there's any like cultural flavors, national flavors, and so on, so we can say, well, actually by region, depending on certain regional beliefs and so on, these are more or less conducive to supporting maybe dream practices and so on. And, there have been studies that have shown, for instance, that there are more lucid dreamers in Switzerland than there are in Japan, right? And when they dig into that,
that's fascinating.
Yeah, it's more like, okay, well, the countries that have, a more of a stronger relationship to dreaming, so dreaming traditions, because of people like Freud and Jung and the psychoanalysts in those parts of Europe, for instance, they pay attention to dreams more. If you have more dream recall, then you're more likely to lucid dream. In Japan, where you have more of a kind of Zen background, everything immaculate, everything impermanent, then you don't tend to dream journal as much, so it's dismissed and therefore less dream recall. Not to say, but then, if there are Japanese participants who are training dream recall, then it evens out,
Absolutely.
So it's not about...
It's more of a cultural impact
exactly.
on
So
the way.
what is it that we can do to support access into, and can we find different access points depending on cultural beliefs and systems, as well, and how do we support that with our technology and tools?
And identifying whether or not that's a useful thing to do.
Exactly.
And I think that's one of the key touchstones. I was having lunch with a friend of mine, and she was describing, out in the world studying some of this activity, you put yourself in a position to be attacked by people around the world, being interviewed, being very combatively, very aggressively interviewed. And then, hey, this isn't real science. You're a dreamer, a true believer. You're not doing science, and it's problematic because the work is truly scientific in design of experimentation and looking for very real results.
Yeah,
and not always finding them, by the way, because you don't always find results doing science.
That absolutely is one of the things about Midas. We are in that position where we can just play around and see. If something works, it works. If it doesn't, it doesn't. But we are bold enough to try it out. And if we need to update things, we update things.
Absolutely.
And so what we plugged into as an institute is, so the Monroe Institute is a founding partner of an independent research center that we set up in the north of England called the Center for Liminal Studies.
Yeah.
So this is plugged into what's called Broughton Estate or Broughton Sanctuary, which is a very historic site in near Skipton in the north of England. And what we're doing there is bridging connection, collaboration, also doing some in-house testing. So that will be, maybe less for the peer review stuff and more about, the product tweaking like we've done for a long time here. But then we can start to say, okay, well, they're working on a particular project. Would you like to plug Monroe Sound Science into that and just see what happens?
Yeah.
Does it enhance it? Does it not? And so on. So we have university partners, the Aleph Trust, so that brings in the University of Northampton. For instance, we're working with people all over the place. And these are all really interested, but sometimes what happens is within their academic institutions, then maybe they're like, this is too fringe and we're not going to back that.
Yeah.
Here's a place where they can plug in. And then there's a journal for liminal studies, which will come out, which will allow a publicly facing, not behind a paywall publication so that people can find out and get involved. And then there's the dissemination, there's the arts, there's all kinds of things, workshops and so on that people can be engaged in their communities.
That's going to be a fun one to watch. I'm really interested to see how it's received and what people will do when it starts to happen. Because, I mean, we're all going to brace ourselves.
Yes.
And at the same time, it doesn't stop us from doing the work.
Yeah, we don't know what's going to happen. And,
Yeah.
you know, the thing about being attacked, I mean, you know, that goes with the territory.
Absolutely.
I mean, it's like, okay, well, if this doesn't fit your belief and it really challenges you, fine.
Great.
But, you know, we're just going to put the information out there. Whoever wants to engage with it, engage with it. But, you know, to deny a major part of people's personal experiences is a bit weird to me.
It seems like it to me. It sort of suggests that if your experience doesn't fit mine, I'm somehow being attacked.
Sure.
And that, I think we'll get past that. I think we're in the process of getting past that.
We're in the process of getting past that. And you know, I mean, a lot of the academics that I speak with are, you know, obviously they have their specialist areas and whatever else and structures in terms of how they do things, but they're a lot more open than you think. It's just that, you know, outward facing and what they might say is either a little bit more muted or not, you know. And I mean, the physics is there as well. I mean, you know, I was at a conference with Bernard Carr, who was talking about time and all the issues with that. And there isn't this kind of absolute reference point for time. You know, I think Einstein said that back in the day.
He did. We're finally catching up.
Yeah, we're finally catching up.
Him and John Wheeler kind of knew.
And he was saying something, you know, Bernard was saying something along the lines of, well, you know, I'm retired. I don't really care. I can put these things out there. I have far less risk. And I appreciate that, you know, and I hope that, you know, things do start to open up. And then people say, oh, he's talking crazy. You know, who should listen to this guy? It's like, he was the first PhD student of Stephen Hawking. That's why you should listen to that guy. You know, so these aren't fringe.
Kinda not a slouch. Cool.
It doesn't like, hey, you know, and then even if it was, you know, fair play, but
yeah, cool. All right.
You know, these are robust scientific theories,
right?
Based on absolute. I mean, nothing's absolute, but like, you know, the rigorous scientific approaches. You know, this isn't speculative,
right?
And yet the science is there, but. For a lot of people, that doesn't translate into anything tangible.
Because we still have to pay our taxes. We still have to keep a roof over our head. We still got to eat dinner.
Look at the alien stuff, right? You know, I mean...
I was hoping you'd bring that up.
Now more stuff's being dubbed, so I'm really not going to go into it deeply.
Fair.
But, I mean, it came up a few years ago, by the way. These things were flying around and we couldn't keep up with them.
Yeah.
They dropped 90 degrees into water without a splash and go that way. You know, and then we were like, how much is this going to cost me? What's the interest rate like right now? You know... How much is my mortgage? You know, and that really is where people are, you know, for the most part. And we've got to honor that.
Absolutely.
So if aliens come, we go, do they want our jobs? Is this going to cost me anything? You know, that's the first level. But,
no.
No, I think the first thing is that actually people would freak out and there'd be ontological shock. You know, so it's like, how do you prepare people when they're in a particular paradigm? The paradigm's already shifting. It's not that we're trying to work out, you know, the next paradigm isn't fully formed yet.
Yeah.
So we're in this transition phase, but it's very clear that the previous paradigm is kind of dying a death.
It's falling quickly.
And quite quickly. So then what does the next thing look like, and how do we prepare people in a gentle way so that they're not freaked out by what's coming next?
Because what, for up until maybe 100, 150 years ago, the rate of change societally was so slow that we've evolved as people in societies to expect basically stasis in experience. You do what your father or mother did.
Yep.
Your kids are going to do the same thing. Now, Mom and Dad, I'm using technologies that didn't exist when I was born, let alone when they were born.
Very much so. And likewise, I mean, when you see this idea of a job for life, that was back in the day, you know, your dad was in banking, you end up carrying on as the banker, and so it must be. There are jobs that it just won't exist like that going forward. I mean, AI is going to obliterate tons of them and create other ones in the that we don't even know of yet. So that ability to be flexible, to reskill, is so important right now.
And it's something we're all struggling with as a society, because it is happening so quickly now.
Yes. And one of the things, and this is where I think the work that we're doing at the Institute is so relevant, because what we're saying is, if you just try to take only your conscious mind as you've been training it into this new world, it's going to be pretty tricky.
Yeah.
You're going to be overwhelmed almost instantly. If you can start to tap into deeper resources, greater aspects of yourself, to tap into your deeper being, and use that as a flexible resource to be able to engage with reality, then maybe you might have an easier ride.
I think so, and I think that is a perfect summary. Luigi, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you.
I can't tell you how much I enjoyed this.
Yeah, I'm glad we could make it happen.
Absolutely. Friends, thank you so much for joining us today. Whenever you watch this, I appreciate you guys.
Thank you.
Let's call it.
All right, gang, that's it for today's episode. A huge thank you to Luigi Sciambarella for making time to sit down with me. We taped this during a break in his trainer duties, and he helped me to manage a space for the taping, and we got to enjoy a lunch together. On that note, a massive thanks to the Monroe Institute kitchen staff for feeding us. Absolutely clutch and delicious food as always. Also, huge thanks to Alan Evans for letting us shoot this in her office and for stopping in to make sure we were set. I can't even with my gratitude. And of course, thanks to Team NMS, Anna the Wild Orazan, and Emily Rivers. The show wouldn't exist the way that it does without the two of you. Getting to do this show is one of the most incredible aspects of my life, and I'm so glad that you're on this journey with me. If you enjoyed today's conversation, don't forget to subscribe, rate, and comment on the show wherever you are, and please share us with a friend. It really helps us grow and bring on even more incredible guests like Luigi Sciambarella. You can also follow along on Instagram at No More Strangers Podcast to keep the conversation going. Lastly, thank you again for tuning in, and until next time, take care, keep exploring, and as always, I hope that you now have one less stranger in your life.